not a matter of words only. It is a matter of making the whole world intelligible. And the best index of the world, as well as the individual mind, is found in the life writings. It's in the life writings. So this center would take up translation of all sorts of topics under life writing, covering a wide range of genres like biography, autofiction, diaries and letters, memoirs, digital life writing, including social media, blogs, audio and video, visual arts, poetry, medical narratives, including case histories, etc. Now, to cross-fertilize research into these different forms of life writing, the center brings together Ramadevi University's academics from the departments of English, Odia, and Hindi. The center could be established only because of our esteemed Vice Chancellor's initial instructions. These initial instructions metamorphosed into guidance lines of guide, with today we have taken the steps towards establishing the center, which sees a bright future. So I'd like to thank our Vice Chancellor for all the guidance he has given. Invite Professor Jatindra K Nayak, who is the mentor of our university, of the COE of RDWU. I invite you, sir, to address the meeting.
Thank you, Professor Pati, for giving me this opportunity to say a few words about the center. At the outset, I express our deep gratitude to Professor Padmaja Mishra, Madam Vice Chancellor, to whom we stand deeply obliged for her unstinted support and her dynamic leadership. And we are also very grateful to the distinguished scholars who are with us today. Professor Kaiser Hock, my friend, I'm so glad to see him here virtually. And the other scholars who are associated with this center on this webinar today. And they will give us a sense of new direction. So I'm deeply obliged to them for their participation. So I would say a few words about this center of excellence in life writing and translation, which has been set up with the help of with sincere assistance of the State Higher Education Council. So I also take this opportunity to thank Professor Ashok Das, the Vice Chairman of the Center for the State Council of Higher Education, for his unfailing support and encouragement. So now I must explain on behalf of the center, on behalf of the head of the department, why we felt the need to set up this center. Because I think an explanation is in order, because this is the first of its kind in Odisha and maybe in India. So we must explain to our students, our stakeholders and our friends why we felt the need for setting up a center like this. I think the most important reason for doing so is that interdisciplinarity is the call of the hour or need of the hour. Everybody is talking about the need for interdisciplinarity, and we can no longer afford to retreat into the silos of our single academic disciplines. So there is this urgent need for breaching the boundaries of single disciplines and interacting with other disciplines, and through interdisciplinarity to push the boundaries of research and to enrich the understanding of society, culture and history. So we thought that such a center is needed, and this center focuses on life writing because life writing provides a space where several disciplines intersect and can learn from and supplement each other. So this is the reason why you focused upon life writing as the focus area of our center. Disciplines have remained landlocked for a long time within their own areas of study, and they have operated in isolation. one department knew very little about what the other department was doing, although they are physically very close to each other. For instance, English departments knew very little about Odia departments or Bangla departments or Hindi departments, although they might be inhabiting the same geographical or physical space. So we thought that this is not a very nice state of things. This is not a desirable state of things, and we all get impoverished through this isolation, through this pursuit of knowledge in conditions of isolation. So it's recently that they're beginning to interact with each other, these disciplines everywhere. There is a pressure on them, and there is this felt need to interact with each other, learn from each other, supplement our understanding of each other's subjects. In Oxford and Sussex universities, for example, centers of life writing have been set up, and they're very active, they're very vibrant, and they attract scholars from all kinds of subjects and disciplines. So we must step out of our academic silos and initiate an enriching dialogue with other disciplines through this center of excellence in translation and life writing. So this is the reason why we felt the need for founding or establishing a center of life writing and translation, because translation will also play a vital part in disseminating knowledge about life writing done in Odia, life writing done in Hindi and other Indian languages. So we will first concentrate on Odia and Hindi, and to some extent English, and then we'll branch out in other directions. So now I'll turn to the other questions. Let's dwell briefly on reasons why autobiographies were not considered a fit subject for scholarly academic study. As we all know, autobiographies were not a very, I think they are not subjects for respectable academic study for a long time. All the people wrote autobiographies, memoirs, biographies, diaries, letters, but they didn't constitute a respectable field of academic study. So I will briefly go into some of the reasons why this state of affairs arose in the first place. So immediately the culprit the immediate culprit would be neocriticism. I think our departments of English were for a very long time dominated by neocriticism, which discouraged the study of biographies, historical contexts, autobiographies, and encouraged us, sometimes forced us to look at the words on the page to the exclusion of everything that lay outside the naked words on the naked page. But beyond that, we should also look at other reasons. It's said that life writing is the abandoned child of two disciplines, literature and history. Both the parents have neglected it, abandoned it, sometimes disowned it in the past. So literary critics didn't like autobiographies because they thought autobiographies are uncomfortably close to facts, too factual, have very little to do with the world of imagination. So why should literary critics bother about something that is so mundane, so tied to mundane facts? So this is the reason why literary critics kept away from autobiographies and life writing, and occasionally read them, occasionally used them, but never would concentrate on them or treat it with the respect and attention that it deserved. Historians, for their part, also were very suspicious of autobiographies or life writing because they thought that it was too imaginative, that it shared too many affinities with fiction, that it was narrative, that it's a story about the past, it's a story about people's lives. And they were also worried about the element of subjectivity in autobiographies, that these people are not objective. The kinds of information they provide about the past aren't reliable because they might be colored by subjectivity, by emotions, by their access to grind. So for these reasons, it was abandoned often by its own parents, literature and history. But things changed. Thank God. Fortunately for autobiographies, life writing, things began changing. And now life writing is increasingly beginning to be recognized as a subject in its own right, a highly important field of study, area of knowledge. So this happened for two reasons. There are many reasons, but I will dwell on two for the time being. One is the historians lost confidence in what they considered to be irrefutable evidence. Increasingly, historians realize that what they considered evidence, what they consider facts, are also constructed as narratives, as stories. The powerful constantly, I think, interfere with. For instance, in an archive, historians used to valorize or privilege archives. Whatever is available in an archive is irrefutable historical evidence. But who put those records in that archive? The British put only those records or those pieces of evidence which they considered important. So they found that what they considered evidence is not adequate, is not always reliable, and has been shaped by, distorted by power relations. Similarly, literary critics could discuss literature in complete isolation from the world in which the real world in which it's embedded, the real world with which it has to constantly negotiate. For instance, book history makes us aware of the vicissitudes through which the book as a physical object goes through. And even neocritics sometimes conceal their knowledge of the external world when they pretend that they're only looking at words on the page. For instance, the editions. How do they know that that's the text which the author intended? It might have gone through several editions. It might have been corrupted. So all these questions made literary critics also take the world, the real world in which literature takes place, literature is created, more seriously. So autobiography or life writing came to be treated with more and more respect. So now conditions are ripe for giving life writing the importance or the attention it always deserved, but unfortunately didn't receive. Now I'll turn to the other question. What does life writing do so that a whole center should be devoted to it, devoted to the study of it? I think life writing accomplishes many tasks. It's not just, it doesn't merely tell the story of a life. It does much more than that. And I just mentioned how life writing provides a point of convergence between several disciplines. It's not just a mere uncomplicated, unproblematic story of an individual's life or individual subjective experiences. So I will describe some of the tasks that an autobiography seeks to accomplish. One is it rescues individuals from complete erasure. We live in a world where as individuals we can get easily erased. We live in an impersonal world in which anonymity is the destiny of many of us. And our world is changing so fast that we need to remember it before it completely disappears from view. This is the reason for which, for instance, during the Industrial Revolution, when the countryside completely changed in Britain, sometimes was completely erased, lots of autobiographies came to be written, celebrating a landscape which no longer existed. So autobiographies or life writing is one way in which we can rescue our existence as individuals, our existence as communities from the burden of erasure. So that's one major task of, or at least historically, this has been one of the major tasks of autobiography. And it enables some to bear witness. Because when somebody writes an autobiography, he's simply not talking about himself. Even when we talk about himself, we can escape having to talk about others because our past contains pieces of other people's past. So we can't imagine ourselves completely cut off from the world which sustains, embeds, and gives meaning to our existence. So many autobiographies actually are written to bear witness. I'll give the example of, say, example close from home. Fakir Mohan Senapati, when he the writer of the first autobiography in ODI, if you read the preface he writes, he says that I write this autobiography says very little about his personal life. It certainly says a lot about his career, but actually he's bearing witness to a period of traumatic transition in the history of Odisha. Late 19th century or mid 19th century to early 20th century, the whole society is undergoing painful, traumatic transition, transformation. And here is a writer who is bearing witness. He's not bothered about what feelings he experienced, what his inner world was like, but he's actually bearing witness. And the famous autobiography titled Witness to an Era, which Frank Moraes, the famous autobiographer, the famous journalist, wrote. So autobiographies also bear witness to a transitional period in the life of a community or a nation. And sometimes it has to save the past for and from the future. They turn private memory into public memory. Once an autobiography is written, it might begin by recollecting and collecting and recording private memories, but once it's written, once readers access it, it becomes transformed into public memory. It becomes part of the collective memory. So this transition is accomplished. This transformation is accomplished through autobiographies and through life writing. It's a very important part of human history. Private memories turning into collective memory. So without private memories of this kind, which are found in autobiographies, collective memory will be deeply impoverished. So autobiographies, life writing also enrich collective memory, thereby giving us a sense of our collective identity. And that's why it has been called autobiography is called art's alternative to history, because it creates an alternative archive through the operation of memory. It's no wonder that 3 autobiographies in Odia are titled My Place in Odisha's History in the Last Century or Last Half Century. Each one of them is trying to locate their places in a larger history. They're simply not talking about an inner life or the life of an individual's life, limited by birth and death. So they're not talking about that life, they're trying to locate it in a larger context of a century or a half century, and they're acutely conscious of their place in history. So autobiography also carries out this very significant task. And life writing creates a space in which several disciplines like anthropology, sociology, philosophy, history, psychology, politics can contribute to our knowledge and expand our cultural understanding. These days, for instance, a lot of doctors are using autobiography or life writing as journal writing or diary writing as therapy. So life writing performs all these functions and more. I'm just listing only a few. So they can at the same time be seen as sources of knowledge. I think Professor Hawk will talk to us about the uses of autobiography for South Asians, and I hope he will talk about autobiography as history. In colonial India, I think when the British or our colonial masters accused us of not having a sense of the past or sense of history, I think life writing stepped into this so-called vacuum and created a sense of history. So for us, for many of us, autobiographies are sources of precious knowledge, invaluable knowledge about history, about past. So autobiographies can also be read as history, as social history, as political histories. If we read a lot of autobiographies written by politicians, they will give us a very different perspective and yield very different insights into what we consider to be an entirely public event, a life lived entirely in the public sphere or public realm. So autobiographies give us less known but extremely important sources of knowledge about the past and the present. And these are usable parts. It's not as if autobiographies are just nostalgic accounts or nostalgic recreation of a dead past. They can be used as usable parts. They can be employed as usable parts. Sometimes the past actually never dies. The past is never past, as Auden said. Past can be used, as we have seen recently, to shape the future, to sometimes distort the present. So autobiographies also give us a usable past as sources of knowledge. Now let me come to another very important dimension of autobiographies, because autobiographies are not they don't have a straightforwardness about it. They may appear to be straightforward. They may appear to be simply a string of facts which we need to read about and then form an idea about the author's life and his times, I think autobiographies are highly nuanced and layered texts. So we must also develop a way of reading autobiographies, and we can begin with the anxieties which autobiographies embody. Autobiographers usually express deep-seated anxieties about the task of writing, task of composing their autobiographies. Many autobiographies begin with hesitations, begins with a sense of ambivalence, begins with this uncertainty and hesitation about their task. The most famous example, because I mean they ask themselves these very searching questions. For instance, am I engaging in unethical self-promotion? That's why autobiographies are also called ego narratives. Am I self-indulgent? Am I promoting myself? Am I engaging in an act of unethical self-promotion? We may recall Gandhi's friends dissuading him from writing his autobiography. They said that, why are you doing this? You are projecting your ego. So Gandhi gives a very complicated explanation for not obeying his friend's advice, but you can see the reservations about autobiography, the cultural attitudes which surround the activity of writing autobiographies. Edward Gibbon, the famous author of Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire, wrote 6 versions of his autobiography because he found it extremely difficult to impose coherence on the experience of the past. And we all know that there is this famous example of Yeats giving this very strange title to the account of his life, Autobiographies. It's not an autobiography, but it's autobiographies, several lives, several ways in which that same life can be recounted. So all these anxieties have to be kept in mind. All these raise, and the other question, whenever somebody writes an autobiography, people ask him or her, are you writing this to settle scores? Some autobiographies are actually written to settle scores, to to make your enemies feel bad about things that are done to you. So autobiographies do many things, and they embody the anxieties of those who write them. But ultimately, all these questions that bother them, that exercise their minds, lead us to questions relating to the nature of truth, nature of human communication. Can we communicate to others about our lives, which are so subjective, so supposed to be so intimate? So all these questions lead us to very interesting areas, fascinating areas of exploration, which deserve to be explored. So these questions have to be considered when we, so the center will also find out ways of reading autobiographies. It's not enough to read autobiographies. They are very nuanced and complex constructs, and we must also encourage ways or devise ways or teach our students ways of reading these autobiographies profitably as nuanced text. And now I'll come to something which is more practical. So what do we want to do at the center? What is it that we want to do at this Center for Excellence in Life Writing and Translation? My immediate answer would be many things. But our first task is to build a database. No center will really function meaningfully unless it creates a very rich database of bibliography. So without an archive, without a database, we can't even imagine a center to function in any meaningful way. So our first task has been to create this database. And with the help of Professor Pati and her team, we are now preparing a bibliography of Odia autobiographies and Hindi autobiographies, or Odia life writing and Hindi life writing. And very soon we will try to develop these into annotated bibliographies, because I think that they will be far more usable, far more useful for scholars. So a beginning has been made. So we have a rich and vast resource. When we started working on preparing a bibliography of Odia biographies, we discovered that a vast and rich resource is waiting to be explored. Everybody knew about them, but we didn't know how rich this resource is, how vast this resource is. So there are more than 200 completed ODI autobiographies and many more autobiographical fragments. To these we can add letters, diaries, journals, biographies, souvenirs, and these days, of course, in the age of the internet, you can talk about, or you can include blogs and other things. So we have a vast resource at our disposal, which lies unexamined and unexplored. And even a cursory look at the bibliography reveals fascinating patterns, which could lead to important insights. For instance, the words story and memory recur in many of the titles of these autobiographies, making us aware of the key role narratives play in making our memories coherent, in making sense of and at the same time perhaps distort our past. Many of these autobiographies contrast the past with the present. Many of these autobiographies are titled Those Days and These Days, Then and Now. In the process, reenacting a dramatic encounter with modernity. Most of these autobiographies are actually stories of people's encounter with modernity. Somebody born in a village comes to the city, makes his way in life, achieves something, and when in the twilight years of his life, he reflects upon the course of his life and sees it in terms of encounter with modernity. His world has changed, and he tries to understand the ways in which this world changed, and what are his losses, what are his gains, and what is the character, what is the nature of this new world that he leaves behind to his successors. An annotated bibliography which will be prepared later will yield many more insights and reveal many more complex patterns which then will be studied by younger scholars. So to conclude, I would say a beginning has been made, and with the support of the Vice Chancellor and her dedicated team, the distinguished scholars who are with us today and tomorrow, we are confident that the Centre will push the boundaries of research in this area of knowledge, rather generally speaking, neglected area of knowledge, and broaden the academic landscape. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to share a few stray thoughts with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Nayak, for such an enlightening speech and for really telling us not only about the background of autobiography as a general, but what our the guidelines that we have sent for the center. You will be guiding us for the next 5 years at least till the center is like fully functional, and we are very happy to have you with us as a mentor. Thank you very much. Now I would like to invite Manisha Mishra to introduce our next speaker, Professor Kaiser Haq.